You are listening to the On Purpose podcast. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on our show today and bringing your amazing story to our On Purpose community. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Jerrod. I'm doing great. How about you?
Life is good. It's summertime. I live for summertime. And honestly, for us, being able to avoid winter for a full year has just reaffirmed we really don't like winter.
I relate 100%.
That's good. So I'm excited to get you on here and share some of your life lessons and your leadership philosophy with our community. I've really enjoyed your book, Expansive Impact, and the stories of leadership in it. And I think there's so many valuable lessons in there, and your approach to what I would say kind of the softer side or some of the subtleties of leadership, I think, is going to be very beneficial for people.
Thank you. And that means a lot coming from you with all of your leadership experience and your own experience writing a book. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know how much experience. I just have a lot of experience of making mistakes.
Don't we all?
And I'm a pretty good learner from my mistakes. But before we dive in too much, Sarah, I need to make sure you're warmed up, kind of like a workout or a big hike. We just don't jump into it. And I want our community to know a little bit about you. So I got four little warm up questions. Are you ready for these?
I'm ready. I'll stretch it out a little bit over
All
here.
right, here we go. First warm up question, Sarah. You are stranded on an island and you get to have one food for the rest of your life. What are you going to eat?
Pineapple.
Pineapple? How did
For
that?
pizza.
Yeah, you didn't even come up. You didn't even hesitate. You just went right to pineapple. All right, you got a
Pineapple or pizza. Maybe pineapple on top of pizza.
oh, you're gonna add it to pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. Yeah. Why pineapple?
Similar to what we were talking about with the winter and warm weather, I love all things warm weather. And for some reason, for me, I'd never thought about that answer quite like that before, but pineapple, mango, papaya, it just feels like, being in warm weather. So
Yeah, you've never been sad eating pineapple, I don't think.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
happy food. Good
Exactly.
idea. That's
Yeah.
a good one.
Yeah.
All right, second one. You get one superpower. What superpower would you have and why would you want it?
So I might be dating myself, but the superpower that I've always wanted was or is did you ever watch Bewitched where Samantha could twitch her nose and then, magical things happen? That's
Yeah.
always been my desired superpower.
Okay, and what would you do with it? What's the one thing you've always wanted to twitch your nose and make happen?
I think I would probably use it for more mundane things like twitch my nose and then the laundry would fold itself or, the dishes would do themselves.
That is a great, very mainstream use of a superpower.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. I love
Very
it.
basic.
Yeah, no shame in that one. All right, what book are you currently reading, and would you say is your favorite or your go-to book?
Okay, so I often am reading one fiction book and one nonfiction book. So, and all of my personality types state that I like to do a lot of things at once. So I often have more than one of each, which is maybe not the best. But um, one of the nonfiction books that I'm reading right now, which I really love, is Never Lose a Customer Again, which it just resonates a lot for me with a lot of my philosophies around like relationship building and um, really developing deep relationships with our customers throughout many points of their journey. So that's been really good. And then fiction at this moment, it's something like Red, White, and Blue or something like that. It's a fiction book that I actually picked up in Florida from Hello Again Books, and I'm still at the beginning of it. I'm not fully into it, but that's what I'm reading right now for fiction.
Okay, and if you find yourself in a leadership doldrum or just a down point, you need to pick yourself up. Do you have a book you go to that you've read
Mm,
repeatedly?
yeah, I would say anything by Stephen Covey. I really feel like he is just the epitome of a high integrity leader. And I find whether it's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People or really any of his books, I feel like for me anyway, I can pick them up and really turn to any page and reconnect to, for me, what feels like, my own integrity and the way that I want to show up as a leader. So he would be my go-to. And then the other one that is really helpful for me is anything by Tosha Silver. So Tosha, Tosha.
Yeah.
She has several different books, and she just has this really sort of delightful way of writing, and her messages I find to be so reassuring, particularly, if I feel stuck or feel, not connected to just whatever's meant to be happening in my life. I feel like that's another one where I can just pick up the book, turn to any page, and then feel like reaffirmed in that moment.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's important for our community to understand is like no matter where you're at in life or your leadership journey, it's always good to have those places you go back to that you
Mm-hmm.
can fall back on and they'll put you back in the right space.
I love that. Yeah, that's such a good point.
Because I think
Yeah,
even you wrote about it in your book where sometimes leaders get isolated, right? Like that you get promoted, and all of a sudden your peers are your direct reports, and you kind of lose that support network, and we don't know where to go when we have those down moments.
absolutely. That's such a good point. And what I observe, and I'm curious if you see this as well, but I think it can be easy to look externally for that stuff. Like if, we're at work and we're having a frustrating period of time at work where we're feeling like, oh, I'm looking to my work or my leader or my company or whatever it is for these things that are not fulfilling me. And sometimes that makes sense. But I think a lot of times there's a lot that we can do that's within our own, sphere of impact. So whether it is picking up that book or, putting on some music in the morning or having some kind of personal practice or whatever it is so that we can fill our own cup and then go into whatever it is that we're doing for that day. So I love your thought about our trusty books that we can come back
Yeah,
to.
for sure. And that in this community, we talk consistently about the importance of that morning routine, the gratitude,
Yes.
the intention setting, the taking away the power of negativity to just influence your world with no perspective, right? Like when you wake up and you have gratitude for the project you're going to work on today, you know that okay, when there's obstacles in the way, it's just here to make you grow. It's not to derail your entire day.
Absolutely. Yes, I completely agree. And I know it's gotten so popular over the last, several years that there's so much being talked about and written about around morning routines that, it can feel tired at times almost that conversation. But I agree with you 100%. To me anyway, it is the single most important and influential thing for my day. Like, and I know you have a really beautiful morning routine too. Like if I do that in the morning, even if it's a few minutes, it just makes everything else go so much better. And if I don't take that time, it makes everything else go so much worse. And it's such a clear correlation.
100%. It's empowering, right? Like if I
Absolutely.
wake up and before I look at emails, before I look at social media, before I look at anything external that can influence me, I want me to influence me. Right? I
Yes.
want my internals to influence me. And, it may, like, we had 2 days of no sunshine or rain. And,
Mm,
I think the days like that, the morning routine is critical, right? Because if I don't do it, I wake up and I'm like, it's raining, it's cloudy. I'm just going to hibernate and do nothing versus getting up and be like, okay, I am grateful for the moisture because it's going to keep the summer longer and less fires and more
mm,
crop, right? Like it's the same weather, but my
yes.
perspective can be completely different if I check in with me first.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. And I know you do some journaling and some
Yep,
coffee and often some yoga. Do you have a formal gratitude practice, or do you
I
just
do.
reflect on that, or what does that look
No,
like?
I write it every day. I have
Nice.
I have three things I write about every day: gratitude, my intentions, and then my relationship with money because that was something I struggled with a lot as a
Yeah,
young person.
yeah.
And so those three things every day. That before I do anything else, those are the three things I write about.
Oh, I love that.
And
That's
I
so
like
good.
the physical act of writing because
Yeah.
it's physical, right? So it goes from my head where I think about it to my hands type it to my eyes now read it. So that it reinforces why I feel the way I feel.
That's so good. And I really love that third one about your relationship with money. I'm a huge fan of working to bring the stuff that maybe lives in the shadow. So that it's like we all have these parts of ourselves that are in the shadow or that are more difficult to look at. And I feel like, especially a topic like money, it can be easy to leave it in the shadow and just sort of not look at it and not deal with it. And so I love that you not only are looking at it, but it's become this regular part of your everyday, to the point that it's part of your morning routine. I think that's really, really phenomenal.
Well, I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, honestly, you know what it came down to is there was a time where Andrea and I both reflect and we're like, man, we are living our parents' money issues in our marriage, and
Yeah.
then we're in turn going to teach our kids our money issues that maybe our parents got from their parents, right? Like we have
Yes.
to break this cycle of this more and more and more mentality, and the reality is money is always there, right? Like
Yes.
but how you relate to it is something that I had struggled with quite a bit, and it's it's something we work on, right? Like instead of just pretending like, oh, it's okay, I'll just never deal with this. I don't want that, right? Like, because if I know if I have an issue here, I got to work on it, just
Yeah.
like I expect other people to come to me to work on their issues.
Absolutely. I think that's so powerful. Have you? I just learned about this book over the weekend, actually, and there were pieces that blew my mind as my friend and sister-in-law was talking about it. But it's called Emotional Inheritance. Have you heard about this?
I have. I have
Have
not
you
read
read
the
it?
book. No. Is it good?
No, I haven't read it either. I just learned about it, like I said, over the weekend, and but it was the idea that oftentimes our earliest memories are tied to the things that we struggle with most or that linger with us. So I think what you said about your money story and your parents and the way that that influences you and carries over, it makes a lot of sense. And it seems like her work on this topic sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Like I actually did an episode, I don't know, a few back now, and I talk about this a lot in my law enforcement classes. What I consider transitional fear, and
Mm,
it's like, okay, so I'm your boss, Sarah, and my fear is that the person above the food chain is going to think I'm incompetent, and maybe the way he delivers feedback or he or she delivers feedback to me really gets to my self-esteem, and they're not very good leaders. But they are my boss, so, and I don't want to look
yeah,
bad in front of them. So now I have that fear going up the chain to me. So now
yeah,
you come to me with this crazy out of the box idea that could be revolutionary. It could really change. It could be a game changer. But because I'm so worried about what's going to happen, what my boss is going to think about you taking a risk and its impact on me, I don't want you to do it. I try to corral you back to the box of safety,
yep.
right? So now my fear of what my boss thinks has actually transitioned down to you and is now
Mm-hmm.
impacting your ability to do what you want to do.
Ah, that's so good.
Right. And it
Yes.
transitions and it transitions for parents, right? I use this example, right? My mom, I love my mom. And she listens to every episode. She'll probably get a kick out of this. But when we were kids, like I never used power tools, never touched them. Like I was deathly afraid of them. I was afraid of them because every adult around me told me like, don't use the chainsaw, you'll chop your leg off, or don't use this, you're gonna
Yes.
chop your hand off. So I literally, Sarah, no kidding, I'm almost, I'm not 21 anymore. Um, for most of my life, I would defer using any power tools to any other person around me that might be remotely more qualified than me because I was gonna cut my leg off.
Yep.
Yet my whole life, I never met one person that cut their leg off from a power tool. I've
Yes.
never seen it, right? But so I don't have any I don't have any experience with it. I've never actually seen anybody missing a leg because of a chainsaw. But yeah, I was told it was happened. Like that fear that somebody else had now became my fear, which limited my teaching, right? So I never acted on it. And then my kids never used power tools because I was afraid they were going to cut their legs off. Even though, so for 3 generations, we're not using power tools for a fear of losing our leg when nobody we
Yes.
know ever lost a leg.
Oh, that's so good. Oh my gosh. And I love the applications of that, whether it's at work, which I think that example that you shared is so common. It happens,
Absolutely.
it happens all the time and with parents and kids. And where my head goes as you're talking about that is also how that might be playing out in our society as well, where, I'm thinking about, I've been reading a lot about the impact, of the last few years on mental health and at all ages really, but it's interesting to think about, you know, are there ways in which that's playing out with the news or other things too, where it's that same idea of transitional fear, where it's not happening in our own realm, but we're sort of um, ingesting that, and then we're inhaling it and then exhaling it in other ways. So it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think what's worse is when you go share it as fact to everybody else when it's not even your
Yes,
experience.
yes, yes, yes.
Right now, if I
uh
show up missing a leg and you're like, hey, Jerrod, should I use the chainsaw? I'll be like, well, Sarah, you may not want to because that's how I lost my leg. Or be
yes,
careful.
yes,
Right. So now at least there's that experience. You can be like, hey, Jake, I'm not going to use the chainsaw because I saw Jerrod and he's missing a leg and I don't really want that
totally.
to happen to me. But when, there's a whole pack of us that have both our legs and we're all afraid of chainsaws because somebody told us we might lose a leg,
Yes,
but we've never experienced it for ourselves. That's when that is the issue, right? Because now you're just believing somebody else's truth as your own with no experience.
yes, yes, and living that out, and
Living it
saying that,
out and limiting
passing that on.
yourself. What
Yeah,
if I'd have
yeah.
been the greatest chainsaw guy
Right.
ever? What if that was
You're
my
carving
hidden
wood
talent?
sculptures.
Yes, that's my hidden talent. But I never knew
Totally.
it. But now, you're right, we joke and we laugh and it's a funny topic. But what about this in the work environment, Sarah? What if
Yeah,
your secret talent, what if your mark on the world was that project that you came to me that could have been revolutionary, but because of my fear of how my boss might think about us taking risk, I shut it down. And
absolutely.
now you go your
Yeah.
whole career and never become who you could have become because of me.
Well, absolutely. And I think even beyond that, I see that happen in organizations all the time, where there's that individual impact which you mentioned, which can be extremely detrimental, and people feel squashed and ultimately unhappy, and their soul becomes crushed in that process. And across an organization, that can totally stifle innovation. So I've seen a number of instances where people within the top of an organization, they are absolutely in the situation that you described, where they are shutting down ideas. They're being in some cases sort of cruel and toxic to the people underneath them, because they are receiving that from somewhere else in the organization. And then that ripple effect just spreads and spreads and spreads, and shuts down a lot of ideas. It shuts down a lot of innovation. It shuts down a lot of ability to pivot and evolve with the times and that kind of thing. So I think it's huge. And sometimes that the beginning point of that can actually be a very small group of people or even one person, but then it just spreads and spreads and spreads.
For sure. And it may not even be intentional, right? Like I may not even intentionally know I'm putting you in a box that's stifling your growth. Maybe I'm doing it. Maybe as a parent I'm doing it because I want to protect you from the harsh realities of the world so I don't let you fail a bunch. Right?
Absolutely.
Maybe I insulate you from, the hardship of getting scraped knees and getting back up again. So I'm doing it from a place of love at times, or a place of I
Absolutely.
think I'm protecting you, but in reality, I'm shutting down options for you.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And in a lot of cases, maybe even most, I would say, there probably is good intent underneath. And even in the workplace as well, where it's like, this is probably the safest option, or I'm looking out for you, or, I've seen this go badly in the past, or whatever it is. So I would agree that there's often good intentions underneath, but the actual impact can be detrimental.
For sure. All right, one more. I feel warmed up. How are you feeling
Yeah.
warmed up?
Yeah, I'm feeling warmed up. We got into some good stuff with that one.
I love it. But we got one more, and I love this
Awesome.
question. All right. You get to have dinner with one person, either who's passed away or still living. Who is that person, and what is the one question you would ask them?
Elton John.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, I think I would want to ask him just about his whole life. To me, he's such a legend, and I understand from everything I've read and explored over the years. I understand that at various points in time he received a lot of criticism and a lot of judgment, and he's just, I don't know, he's just endured, and he's continued to create. And his, I don't know if you've seen his most recent album. It's so creative. I mean, he pairs with Miley Cyrus and all these different things, and I think it's a really cool example of um someone who is, I think of him as sort of a grandfather of music as a whole, but he remains open and curious. And I've heard that he's really good about supporting younger up and coming artists. And I just think he's like a really, really cool, interesting person. So he's the one who comes to mind. There
I
are many
love
others,
it.
but
Yeah,
he popped
I
into
don't
mind
know.
first.
I gotta tell you, Sarah. I gotta tell you, as I prepped for this episode, reading the book and looking at the information provided, I gotta tell you, pineapple and Elton John surprised me. I was not expecting pineapple and Elton John there.
I wasn't either.
All right. Well, I love it. And I appreciate you being here. I want to talk about something I really love to dive into when people step into this in their own lives and share it with our community, and that is fear, right? Because I think fear limits us in so much of our life, from either writing the book to taking, going on that date to taking this risk, switching jobs, whatever the case may be. And you talk about fear in your book as well. So I would like to know when you decided, hey, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to write a book that invites people to lead in their everyday moments, what was the biggest fear you faced and how did you overcome that?
Mm, great question. So I would say at the beginning, it was just an overwhelming, it was overwhelmed. So at the beginning, it was, where do I begin? I have all this stuff that I've created over the years and it exists in all these different ways. And um, how the heck do I attempt to bring this together in some sort of, readable, cohesive way that eventually one day potentially will look like a book? So in the beginning, it was overwhelm. Interestingly, I would say that the fear has evolved throughout the course of writing the book. So in the beginning, there was this overwhelm, where to begin. And then,
Right.
you know, midway through, I would say it was a fear of, not capturing things in the correct way, or, um, not writing the book in the correct voice or in a way that really felt completely authentic to me. So that was something I worked on a lot throughout the course of writing the book, was, writing and then at one point rewriting the whole thing in a way that to me felt, most authentic to my voice. So that was midway through. Now that the book is released, I would say the fear is, um, did I, is anyone going to be offended by anything that I put in the book? My intention when I wrote it was to write the book from a place of, the highest possible point of integrity, and obviously all the, stories and things were written in a way that, remain confidential, especially if it was one of those lessons learned type of things. But I would say now that's the biggest point of, um, you know, does this feel does this feel in the highest integrity, not only to me, but to anyone who would read it? And did I do the best possible job of, distilling some of those stories in a way that feels good to anyone who would read them? So that's the thing that I sometimes think of
Sure.
when I'm lying awake at night. The other thing that especially the week that it was published, the thing that hit me overwhelmingly, which was really interesting, was, did I properly source and cite and credit, all the things that I was inspired from over the years? So when I first had, an early draft of the book, I had all these credits on every page where, if there was one concept, I might say like, this concept was inspired by this body of work and this body of work, and it was also sort of inspired by this body of work. And I had just this like, excessive amount of, inspiration credit on a lot of the pages. And several of my editors were like, Sarah, this is great, but this is extremely overwhelming for your reader. Like, your reader
Sure.
does not want to know the spark of inspiration for everything you put in this book. Like, your reader just wants to know what you're saying. And so I took
Yeah.
some of those out. But with that, and again, this hit me weirdly the week that it was published. I had a couple of nights where I woke up and I just was gasping for breath, and I was like, oh my gosh, did I not cite this thing appropriately? Like, was there anything I missed, or should this have been, on the page and not a footnote, that kind of thing. So when you say what was the fear and how did you overcome it, I would
Yeah.
say there were various fears. I wouldn't say that I have completely overcome them, but the thing that I try to come back to with the book and anything else is like, am I standing in my own integrity? Am I in integrity to myself, to other people, and to the greater good? And like, if I'm doing that and I feel like I'm doing that, like that's all I can do. So that's the thing I try to come back to when that fear, creeps up.
Sure. And how, so let me ask you this, because I find this interesting that you mentioned this. You were giving a ton of credit to all kinds of inspiration out there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like every thought. Do you think that you were maybe selling yourself short for your own? Because like we get inspired for ideas, but like these words are yours, and these stories are yours, and these leadership examples are yours. Do you think you sold yourself short a little bit? Is that when the editors were like, these are your ideas, like you don't have to credit everybody for all this stuff?
It's such an interesting point. My best friend actually was the one who told me that. I had her read the book as an early reader, and she was like, Sarah, she said the same thing. She's like, you need to own these ideas and you need to stand. Because I said, I'm worried about if I don't credit all these people and I don't cite all these people and I don't cite all this inspiration, like I'm worried that that's not going to be an integrity because, like very few ideas are original. Like I've studied with all these amazing teachers over the years. Like, I've learned all this stuff over the years and I've gotten it from elsewhere and, I've adapted it and evolved it. And, it's inspired me in some way. And I said to her, I said, I just want to make sure that I'm being an integrity to to all these great teachers and bodies of works that have been out there for all these years. And she said, Sarah, she said, you also have a perspective and you also have something to say, and if you don't stand in that, that's not an integrity either. So you're worried about being an integrity, but like it's also not an integrity to not stand in your own ideas and your own truth. And
Right.
so she gave me a little bit of tough love about that, which was really helpful.
That's funny.
Because she studied a lot of the similar things that I have over the years. So yes, I think you're absolutely right, and that was not a conscious thing that I was
No.
doing, but I think looking back, um, that probably was part of it in terms of not standing in my own credit, my
Yeah,
own
and you know what?
ideas.
You know what it comes to mind, Sarah, and I think our community. This is a great lesson for our community. Is sometimes when we do step into our own greatness. So to me, like you writing this book and sharing all these moments that you've been part of, whether you were the student or the coach or the peer or the supervisor or the subordinate, sharing those is like you stepping into your greatness, right? Like you've gathered all these experiences, you've gathered all this knowledge, and whether there was other people's ideas that helped foster you to look at things through your lens, it's still your lens. And
Mm,
I think sometimes, even if we do get the courage to step into our greatness, we'll put different shadows on it
mm.
through either the kind of like in this one, like, okay, giving a lot of credit to all these other people to certainly deserve credit for some things, but like you should be at the forefront. This is your greatness. And I think at times like we want our kids to step out and take these risks and become great, or we want our subordinates or our peers or whoever we're working with to step up and be great. And we want them to be great on their own. And I think sometimes we kind of shy from putting that spotlight fully on us because of the responsibilities and the perceptions, or quite honestly, the fear of, oh my God, if I'm out here all by myself,
Mm-hmm.
that means all the judgment comes to me.
Yes, it's such a good point. It's so interesting, right? Because you're absolutely right. It's a more vulnerable move to have a position, to speak it and to stand in it and say, this is my position, at least in this moment, this is my position on this topic, or this is my point of view, or this is my perspective. Because you're right, that's what I have to say. And
It
you might
is.
disagree,
Yeah.
versus this is what I have to say, as a liaison to these
Right.
other ideas and these other things. I'm just the liaison.
Right. Right. I'm just the middleman, right? Like how many how
Yes.
many how many bosses or
Oh,
do you hear
yes.
say like, hey guys, I got bad news, but I'm just the middleman. Like, let me just tell you what it is,
Yes.
right? Well, wait a second. No, you must believe in it. Like you are my boss who's
Yes.
telling me this, so you better believe in it if you want me to believe in it.
Yes.
And
Ah, that's so good.
right, and so here's what something that I think about is we can't dim our own lights in life for fear of the moment. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of our society right now is if Jerrod says on June 2nd, 2022 that I believe X, And then in 2040, there's different information that
Mm-hmm.
makes Jerrod think maybe I was wrong on June 2nd. We want to cancel everything I've done in between because I might have been
Yes.
wrong because I didn't know all the information.
Oh,
So we're
yes.
almost like breeding right now and like creating this whole society where people they want to have purpose, right? Like everybody wants purpose in life. We want to find our purpose and everybody wants to be vulnerable and all these buzzwords. But we also don't want to be canceled.
Yes.
So we kind of do it, but we tiptoe with all these disclaimers that, hey, I'm just the middleman. It's not really me. I'm just sharing the message.
Yes. You're absolutely right. And oh my gosh, yes, I have so many thoughts on that. And what comes to mind as you say that also is it's this very paradoxical world that we live in right now because so on one side is exactly what you just said, and we're seeing that all the time. I just saw that there's some kind of app or new technology or something like that that does exactly that, where it goes through and it finds all the things that someone might have posted 20 years ago so that basically we can cancel them today, which is preposterous. So there's that on one side. But then on the other side, something I've been really fascinated by is, I watch people get canceled on the flip side, which is for not having a point of view. So the one that really blew my mind was someone who I follow in the space of health, health and wellness, and her community got really. Some people in her community got very angry at her when she didn't put out a formal position about what was happening in Palestine, a while back now. And in that moment, I was really struck by this idea that this person who specializes in food and nutrition and movement was now expected to have a formal point of view on the issues that are happening in Palestine, which is an extraordinarily complicated topic that even the people in my life who are closest to it, they all say this is extraordinarily complex, and there's all these things that are just not widely understood. So people were pressing her to say, how dare you not have a position, how dare you not speak out on this, like, how dare you not do this on one side, but then on the other side, like, depending on what she might say or not say, that's not favorable either. And then to your point, in 10, 20, 30 years, as we learn more or situations evolve, she might be canceled for that too. So it's really a no-win situation. And something that I read about a lot is the idea of psychological safety. And I think that in our world today, this online world, there really just inherently is no psychological safety, because at the heart of psychological safety is, can you speak freely without fear of repercussion? Can you speak your truth without fear of retaliation? And in a lot of our online spaces, that is just simply not the case anymore.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Psychological safety. So how do we then start to provide that, Sarah? How do we counterbalance that to start creating that space?
Yeah, well, I mean, this sounds perhaps silly, but I think one of the biggest things is just to spend more time being in real life,
Yes,
being
getting off
in
of
the
it.
world. Yes, and being in real life, because you know this too. I mean, one of the things that I love about traveling and being in different parts of the country, or even just different parts of my county or my state, is you can go not even very far and you can find a lot of people with a lot of different points of view. And in real life, for the most part, those people can exist pretty harmoniously. And like, you meet people, you're at a restaurant together, or you're out in nature or whatever it is, and you might vote differently or think differently about various topics, but you connect with the human, and you see each other as human beings, and you have conversations, and at least in generally speaking, you can cultivate some understanding. Whereas, to your earlier point, in these online spaces, it's so easy to just hop on a bandwagon and share something as truth, even if we don't actually know that it's true or we haven't experienced it. And just so polarizing, so vitriolic, which it's so easy to do with just a click or a reshare or whatever it is. So, I mean, I think the first thing is spending time in the real world, spending time in real life, getting out of those spaces, and being in the world. I think also intentionally cultivating relationships and being in conversations with people who think differently and might have different points of views, and maybe they vote differently. And um, I had a realization in some circles that I've been a part of in the past, that they're very homogenous in terms of how people vote or how people think about specific things. And something I've been working on the last couple of years is just spending time in, in places where there is that diversity of thought and perspective, where we can see each other as human beings and learn from each other, even if we might not agree. And then in our workplaces, how do we create psychological safety? I mean, one of the biggest things that we can do is listen and pause. So something that I noticed a lot is, we're all working, generally speaking, a lot of us are working at a fast speed. We have a lot going on, there's a lot to do, and it can be really easy to get an idea or hear a thought from someone and just immediately respond. And, it's like,
Right.
no, we're not going to do that right now. Or we've tried that in the past. And just pausing, taking it in, listening, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that perspective. Thank you for your point of view. Some of those really small things can have a really big difference.
Yeah, I love it. And that goes into perfect segue there, almost like it was planned for you. It goes into the next part of your leadership philosophy that I really loved, and I think this is a place that we can definitely improve upon, is getting away from an either or mindset
Mm,
to a both and and.
mm-hmm.
And how do we do that, right? And it's funny because that is one of the goals I have for myself every day, is to understand, right? Like I
Mm,
don't want to. I went through so much of my life, Sarah, where I wanted to be right. Like it was very important
mm.
for me to be right. And as I sit and reflect back, I think, man, what an idiot you were, dude, to try to be right all the time, because you being right meant you didn't learn why somebody else felt they were right.
Mm-hmm.
I was so worried about winning, so that meant I could win and you would lose, right? So
Mm.
there's both an and, I think, ties perfectly into understanding.
Mm.
So
Yes.
how do we shift from going into conversations or decision points where it has to be A or B, and start to look at, okay, is there a C or a D option? How do we shift our mindset to allow us to start seeing that?
Absolutely. I love that question. And to me, the way you ask the question actually is also part of the answer. So one thing that I think can be interesting and kind of fun if we start to do it is always looking for the C or D. So, if it's presented as A or B, um, what might be the possible C or D or E or F? And I talk about this in the book as the idea of this middle path. And what I find is often there is a middle path. So, you know, should I quit my job or should I stay? Very black and white on the surface, but really there are often many middle paths, which is you start investigating the possibility of starting a business on the side. You start updating your resume and see how that feels. You just open up the job board and see what's out there and you just start poking around. It doesn't mean you have to quit, but it means you're opening the door to that possibility. So there are all these possible middle paths. And um, you know that's one thing that we can do in our everyday lives, is just have have an eye out for what are the possible middle paths, and is there an option C or D or E. So that's something that we can do. I also really like the work of Byron Katie. So she has several questions that she encourages us to ask to interrogate our own thoughts. And even if we just use the first two of her questions, is it true, and can I be certain that it's true, those can be game changing. So, is it true that this is the way it is? Yes, it seems that way. That's what all the news says. That's what all the people say, whatever. Can I be certain that it's true? So, to go back to your point about the chainsaw on the leg, can I be certain that it's true? Do I have hard evidence
Right.
to support this idea? And oftentimes the answer is no. So, if we can continue to interrogate our own thoughts, can I be certain? Can I be certain? Are there other possibilities here? That can be useful. And then, another thing that we can do is ask what I call in the book curiosity-based questions. So if we're taking in information, we can ask a what or a how question. So it's open-ended, it's concise, and often we open up new possibilities. So Jerrod, you tell me that if you ever use a power tool, it's you're going to lose your leg. So instead of saying yes, that's fact, or no, you're wrong, I could say, well, how did you come to that conclusion? What information do you have about that I might not have? What information could I read to learn more about, chainsaw safety in everyday life? What other people could I talk to? Those
Right.
kinds of things. So those questions to open up understanding and possibility and dialogue could be another place to start.
Yeah, and what a amazing world it is if we go into conversations with the expectation of learning or understanding versus trying to be right.
Yes. Yes.
And I got to tell you, so for the audience out there, I actually met Sarah camping this summer in a random, it sounds goofy, but in a random backyard of Florida. We crossed paths, and I think you and Jake were only there for a night.
Well, we were going to be there for a night, but then we met you and Andrea, and then we decided to extend it too because we wanted to hang out with you
Okay, so
longer.
okay, awesome. So we had 2 nights.
Yeah.
2 nights, and now like we've stayed in touch for, I don't know, it's been 4 or 5 months now, and we established a very mutually beneficial relationship that we all enjoy. And I think it was because in that world you're crossing paths and you want to learn, like, okay, what makes you want to come in a van and stay in these people's backyard alongside of us tonight, right?
Hmm.
And like what would we have missed out on if when we crossed paths, we were more focused on just being right and wrong.
Hmm.
Right? You
Absolutely.
don't want to be around those people. Like you wouldn't enjoy those conversations.
Absolutely.
And I would,
Yeah, it's
and
so true.
I would not grow, right? And I think you mentioned it earlier with one of the books you're reading, or you're talking about Elton John actually, the fact that he remains curious.
Mm.
And at some point as adults, we think that curiosity is bad, right? Like we kind of shy away from remaining curious and wanting to learn more about this or more about that or more about the people around us.
Hmm.
And that is something I always challenge in my leadership classes is if you're if you think your leadership is simply the person in front of you for the 8 to 5, 9 to 5, the 10 hours a day you have them, you're very small pictured because when you get to impact them, you're impacting their whole family,
Yes.
right? Like you have a role in their house because if you micromanage and you shut down creativity and you shut down ideas and you deliver feedback that attacks self-esteem, where does that behavior carry itself?
Absolutely.
Almost guarantee the employee takes it home.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think sometimes when we're curious or we think bigger picture, like, okay, what does and you talk about this a lot in the book, just like reflecting of, okay, is this my true self? Is this true to me? Is my leadership right now being true to me? If we ask ourselves on that, we'd probably treat the people around us differently.
Mm. Yes. Yes. And the thing that really strikes me as you say that is to do that, we have to insert a little bit of a pause. And it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to mean meditating for 2 hours a day, but there's a pause between, if we're in that environment, the environment you mentioned earlier that I think is so common with this, transitional fear. I love the way you talked about that. If we're going to break that cycle, it requires us to pause, check in with ourselves, and in that moment, ask, am I doing this? Am I saying this? Am I acting in this way because it's a default behavior and it's what I've seen modeled and I'm just doing the thing I've always seen done? Or in this moment, am I acting in a way that is aligned with my values and is in line with my own sense of integrity and is modeling the kind of leader that I want to be? And what I observe is if we don't have that little pause, it can get really easy to just be stuck in the cycle and we're just we're grinding it out. We have our head down, we're grinding it out, we're checking it off the list, we're doing the thing we always do, and we might not even be aware that we're perpetuating some of these cycles that then lead that person to go home and take it out on their family and feel unfulfilled with their work.
Right.
So as leaders, like how can we insert that tiny little pause just to check in those moments every day?
Oh yes, the pause. And I knew I was gonna like your book when I got uh, to the page where it's talking. Look through the mirror, not the
Mm,
window.
mm-hmm.
Right. Look in the mirror rather than looking out the window. And how did you come to that concept of making sure that you're teaching leadership from within versus exterior?
Mm. Well, I think it probably stemmed from just an observation, which is, if we were to bottom line it very, very bluntly, leadership requires self-awareness. So what I found over and over again is, you know, largely speaking, when when people talk about horror stories about their leaders, oftentimes there was a lack of self-awareness. So,
Yeah.
to point we've been touching on today, the leader didn't necessarily know that they were being a bad leader. They probably weren't trying to be a bad leader. They just did not have the self-awareness to realize how they were behaving or how they were acting. And then on the flip side, the people that were really happy with their leaders, there was this theme of self-awareness. So, fundamentally, it's like my perspective is it is nearly impossible to successfully and effectively lead other people if we are not first leading ourselves and if we don't have that sense of self-awareness. So that's where it has to start at the beginning of the day. And I find that the more that we can become in tune to ourselves and standing in our own truth and grounded in who we are and acting from that place, the more effectively we can lead and coach and engage with others. So that was the through line about leadership. And then interestingly, in the time that I was writing the book, there are so many things going on societally that have created so much division and so much polarization. And it became very interesting to me to look at the same concept on more of a societal or global level. So, I often think what would be different in our world today and in our country and in a lot of different spaces if everyone was looking in the mirror. So,
Yeah.
before we started shouting out the window and accusing every person of doing every various thing wrong or inappropriately, like, what if we just all paused, looked in the mirror, and then proceeded accordingly? So sort of that duality of the personal journey of leadership and then how that might translate to our society and our world today.
Oh, I love it. I want to pose this question to you. What do you think the difference between a leader and a manager is?
Mm, yes. So I might have a slightly different perspective on this than some people I've talked to and some of what I've read. So generally speaking, a lot of the definitions of leadership versus management, leadership talks about being able to inspire and influence, and management talks about, tasks and getting things done, that sort of thing. And I think that is valid. And the way that I typically think about this is as leaders, oftentimes we do need to do both, but it's just how those things play out. So when I'm coaching leaders, particularly those who are leading others or have a team, what I like to suggest is that we think about a quadrant of leading, managing, coaching, and doing. And what I find is that for most leaders, our natural tendency might actually be toward being a doer because we were really good at our core job, we're exceptional at it, and because of that, then we were promoted into a role as a manager or a leader. And so it's really easy to just do the thing ourselves because we know how we want it done and we know it will get done. And sometimes it just feels too slow and cumbersome and burdensome to try to, teach somebody else to do it. So I like to think about it in those quadrants as, where do we naturally fall? And then how can we stretch ourselves into the areas that feel maybe less natural or less comfortable? So at the end of the day, I think of leadership as we are able to share the big picture, we're able to cast a vision, and we are able to bring people on board with us. And that's what I think of when I think of leadership. Now, beneath that, there's also usually a lot of stuff that needs to get done, which is where that management piece comes in, where are the projects on track? Are we moving forward? Are the deliverables being delivered? Is the budget on track? Whatever it might be. And that needs to happen too, whether we are the ones doing that or someone else is the one doing that. That's often part of the picture, but that's how I tend to think of those things as kind of, fitting together.
Oh, I love it. And would you say, or would you agree, to me, one of the biggest differences, because you can lead and manage, right? Like they're not or they're not either or, they're
Right.
both, right? I can be a great leader and still manage tasks.
Yep.
But I may not be a good manager and be able to be a leader, right? Like I'm be able to manage tasks but not lead people. Would you think that the self-awareness is the key there, that the great leaders are usually very self-aware and the people that are poor leaders will generally lack that skill?
Mm. I do think that the self-awareness is a big piece. I think there's also some muscle building that can go along with that. So for example, I work with a lot of people who maybe have an engineering background, which is
Oh,
much more
very
aligned with
technical.
management.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Projects, what's the status of the project, budget, programs, issues, resolution, whatever it is. And so to me, oftentimes that's actually not necessarily a lack of self-awareness. It's just they're very used to doing things a certain way because that's what made them a really good, project manager
Right.
or engineer or whatever it is. So now it's a matter of, okay, how can we take all that is good about that skill set, which, there's a lot of really great stuff about that. And now how can we help you aim, what I call low and to the left. So if we're looking at the dartboard, how can you aim low and left, which is more toward that lead or perhaps coach, if your natural tendency is to throw the dart high into the right, which is very very technical tactical management. So oftentimes I find that even some just some skills and new tools can help with that. So moving more from a management of tasks to a coaching approach where we are asking questions and we are also talking about the person. We're not just talking about the tasks or the project. Having some tools to help us share the vision and share the why, that can often help, I find as well, particularly if someone is more drawn toward that management approach.
Sure. Yeah. And I love that. Sarah, as we wrap up this week, do you have just a couple tips for our community that you would share with them to help them step into leading in their everyday moments?
Mm. The first thing I would say is to start small. So typically, no matter what is happening around us, there is something that we can do. And that something could be really, really tiny. So, if we're looking to make some kind of impact or we're looking to make a change or we're pondering a big question, the first thing I would invite people to think about is what is the smallest possible action that I can take? And sometimes that action is teeny, teeny, tiny. So, to go back to our choice A or B about leaving or staying in a career, sometimes the first action might be I'm going to go find my resume, which is buried in a folder somewhere. I'm just going to find it and I'm going to bring it up on my computer. That might be the first action. Or, if we're feeling overwhelmed about the events of the world right now, the first action might be I'm going to pick one part of the puzzle and I'm going to do a search on that. And I'm just going to find 3 reputable articles where I can read a little bit and deepen my understanding. That's my first place to start. So I think the first one would be start small and think about what is the smallest possible action I could take. The second one I would say relates to what you and I have been talking about morning routine and filling our own cup before we go into our day. So, I know you talk about this a lot too, but what would be one thing that our listeners could do that would help them fill their own cup and help them show up
Mm-hmm.
more effectively today? So is it pausing in the morning? Is it, doing 10 sit-ups
Sure.
before work? Is it that gratitude practice? Whatever it might be, but what's one tiny thing that will help me show up as my best self today? And how can I incorporate that? And then the third that comes to mind as we're talking about, leading in everyday moments would be a little bit more tactical or a little bit more systems focused. So, you know, I'm a big fan of making leadership a habit, and we don't have to carry that all in our heads. So if we're trying to be a better leader, maybe a first action we could take would be to schedule 30 minutes on our calendar every single week. And we call that 30-minute block leadership. And inside there, we put, 3 to 5 or 10 ideas of something we could do in that 30-minute block to be a better leader. It could be write a handwritten note to someone, express gratitude to a team
Mm-hmm.
member. It could be do a walk if we're working in person, do a walk around the office and just connect with people. It could be, you know, get our team together for a quick coaching session, whatever it is. So, schedule that on the calendar, have some ideas of what that could look like and make it a practice that's scheduled into our day, just like a meeting would be. Because what I observe a lot of times is we might want to be a better leader, but if we don't carve out time for it and if we don't put intentionality into it, it's likely not going to get done. You use the example of
Sure.
working out and stretching, same thing. We've got to make time for that. And I would say the same thing about leadership.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us this week. I think our community is going to get a lot of great information out of this. Where can they follow you and find your book, Expansive Impact?
Thank you for asking. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation, and I feel like I could talk to you for hours about some of these topics that we went into. I want to have a whole follow up on transitional fear and
Yeah, we'll do it. Let's
journaling
schedule
about
it.
shadow topics. So it was awesome. So thank you. Um, so the book Expansive Impact, you can find it pretty much anywhere that books are sold. It's on Amazon, it's on Bookshop, it's on Target. If you search Expansive Impact, Sarah Young, that's a great way to find it. I also have on my website, that's my home base for most things. So if you go to my website, which is zingcollaborative.com, ZING /book, you'll find more info on the book and resources and all that good stuff. And then another great way to connect, if folks would like to stay connected after today, is via my newsletter. It's called Friday Favorites. I send it out every Friday morning. That link is the same website, zingcollaborative.com /Friday Favorites. And you can sign up for the newsletter. It's free. And that's sort of my primary way of staying connected with the community. It's a mix of some reflections and resources and articles and invitations that we can use in our leadership for the week. And then social media, I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram as well, under those same names, Zing Collaborative.
Awesome. Thanks so much again, Sarah, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to share your story, and thank you for trusting us to bring it to our community.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. And it was a delight to talk with you.
And remember, team, life is far too short to live any other way than on purpose. We will see you all again next week.